The wind carried the scent of ash and old sorrow as Thaddeus Quinn stepped down from his wagon, boots sinking into the ruin of a life he'd promised to join. It wasn't the first time he'd stepped into a silence this thick. He'd seen towns emptied by fever, stage routes gone dry, and partners buried under rock slides no man could have seen coming. But this was something else. The ground still smoldered in places, like it hadn't finished grieving. The air was sharp with the tang of charred pine and scorched grain. A low breeze combed through the blackened beams like a mourner's hand brushing a loved one's hair. From the breast pocket of his coat, just over his heart, the corner of a letter poked out. The paper had yellowed on the edges, curled some from long travel. He'd read it enough times to remember every line. "I'll be waiting by the stone chimney," Mercy Bellamy had written. "There's plenty to rebuild, but I have land, strength, and hope to offer. I ask only for the same in return." There was no chimney anymore. The wagon creaked behind him, his two horses shifting against their harnesses as the wind changed direction. He pulled his hat low against it, eyes narrowed as he scanned the remains. The cabin had once stood square against the slope of a gentle hill, facing east toward the rising sun. Now, the front stoop was a memory. A few stone foundation blocks jutted out like ribs from the earth. The rest had collapsed inward, nothing but timber char and metal curls where hinges used to be. He spotted a barn, half its roof gone, but walls still upright, leaning stubbornly against time. The ground between the barn and where the house had stood was littered with broken glass and the twisted remains of a cast-iron stove. He walked carefully, stepping around what might have once been the porch rail. And then he saw her. She sat straight-backed on a log, blackened at the base, as though someone had tried to shape it into a seat when the fire had already taken hold. Her dress was plain brown calico, faded and dirt-smudged, the hem frayed where it met her boots. A bonnet shaded her face. But when she looked up, he caught the firelight reflection in her eyes green, sharp, unyielding. "You must be Mr. Quinn," she said, her voice as calm as the horizon. "I apologize for the circumstances of your arrival." Thaddeus removed his hat slowly. The wind caught at his coat, flapping it open just enough to expose the edge of his satchel. "Ma'am," he said, voice gruffer than intended. "When did this happen?" 3 days ago." She turned her gaze back toward the ruined house. Storm rolled in from the north. Lightning hit the chimney just before nightfall. I managed to get some animals out, a few belongings, not much else. Her left sleeve was pinned neatly at the shoulder, empty beneath the cloth. He didn't stare, but he noticed. You couldn't help but notice. "I was told I'd find a widow here," he said gently. "A woman needing help. I didn't expect." She turned toward him, defiant but not bitter. "You didn't expect a woman who'd already lost everything once." "No," he admitted, "but I reckon that's exactly what I found." They stood in silence a long moment, wind brushing across the open ground, lifting ash into lazy spirals behind them. A weathered wooden wheel on his wagon gave a sharp creak. A pair of crows broke from the tall grass and disappeared into the sky. He cleared his throat. "Where have you been sleeping?" "The barn." "What's left of it?" She stood slowly, despite the fire, the ash, the pinned sleeve. She stood like a woman still unbent. "Mr. Quinn, I'd understand if you turned that wagon around. This isn't what my letters promised." "No," he said, stepping closer. "It isn't. But what did you save from the fire?" That question caught her off guard. some tools, a few pots, blankets, my husband's old rifle. Why? Because, he said, surveying the land like a builder would. I see good soil. I see a creek that didn't run dry. And I see you, a woman who survived not once, but twice. Her hand moved, almost unconsciously, to her shoulder. Threshing machine. 2 years back. Samuel, my late husband, died trying to pull me free. Infection set in. Took him 3 weeks later. Thaddeus took that in quietly. And since then, I worked the land, did what I could. Then you're stronger than most men I've known. He turned to the wagon. Then back. I didn't come all this way to turn back. I came here to help build a life. Looks like that life just needs building from the ground up. A flicker of something passed through her eyes, doubt. Maybe. Hope. Certainly. Mr. Quinn, she said softly. I must be honest. I have little left. The seed money I saved burned with the house. I can offer you land and companionship, but little else. He almost smiled. If only she knew what rested beneath the false bottom of his chest. But that would wait. I still wish to honor our agreement, he said plainly. If you'll have me. But marriage can wait. Let's get a roof up first. You mean to stay? I mean to build us a home. The wind shifted again. This time it carried no ash, just the faint scent of pine from somewhere far up the hill. There's something else you should know, she said. I have a daughter, Clara, 10 years old. She's staying in town with the schoolteacher until I knew what to do. That changed things, but not in the way she feared. Then we'd best get to work, he said. A little girl needs a proper home. They worked as the sun dipped low behind the hills. He moved the wagon closer to the barn, unloaded what could be salvaged. She guided him to a stone well half hidden behind scorched timbers. Water still ran cold and clean. That night, he slept under the wagon, wrapped in a wool blanket. The stars burned hard and clear above him. The kind of sky you only saw out west, like a ceiling made of nail holes. Across the yard, inside the skeleton of the barn, a single oil lantern flickered near the doorway. Mercy's shadow moved behind it, steady and silent. He woke before sunrise to the sound of kindling catching flame. She was already up, crouched by a small fire pit near the barn's entrance. Coffee, she asked, holding up a dented tin pot. Much obliged. She handed him a tin cup, the handle wrapped in a strip of cloth. The first sip surprised him rich, strong, clean. This is good coffee. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. One of the few luxuries I allow myself. They sat in companionable silence, the fire popping between them, as the sky turned from black to navy, then to soft rose. The wind was gentle, almost warm. He drained his cup and set it aside. I need to ride into town, get some supplies, meet your daughter. She hesitated. I'd like you to come, he said. Help choose what we need. Clara should see you. Let her know it's going to be all right. She nodded, slowly. All right. He stood, brushed the dust from his coat, then turned to the wagon. Before we go, I want to show you something. She followed him around to the rear. He pulled aside a crate of flour and a folded tarpaulin, revealing a sturdy wooden chest from his vest pocket. He drew a small brass key. I haven't been entirely forthcoming, he said. Her eyes narrowed. What do you mean? He opened the chest, beneath a layer of shirts and a folded oilskin. He lifted the false bottom. Inside, stacks of currency, wrapped bundles of gold and silver coins, and 2 leather pouches that jingled softly when he moved them. Her breath caught. Where, what, how much is that? Near on $15,000. Gold, silver, some bills. Her face was unreadable. Are you running from something, Mr. Quinn? He met her eyes squarely. No. Ma'am. Came by it honest. I sold my share in a freight company back in Kansas City. I've been looking for something simpler. Something real. She looked back at the money, then at him. Why not tell me in your letters? Because I didn't want someone choosing me for what I had. I wanted someone who'd choose to stay when the fire's already been. The fire crackled quietly behind them. She closed the chest gently. And now, knowing what you know. He looked toward the ruins, then back to her. Now I know I came to the right place. That night. The wind shifted again, but no ash rode with it, just the smell of cold earth and pine, and the distant promise of something better. That night, as wind rattled through the skeletal remains of the barn, Thaddeus lay awake in his wagon and thought, what sort of woman survives the fire and stands taller in its wake? The sun rose pale and cold over Crescent Bluff, lighting the burned beams like old bones on the prairie. A thin ribbon of smoke climbed from the cook fire Mercy had built near the barn. The sky wore its winter veil early, a gray stretch from ridge to ridge that gave no promise of warmth, only clarity. The day would be dry, maybe bitter by nightfall, but the light touched everything with a kind of honest sharpness. You couldn't lie in light like that. It stripped illusions from the land, the same way the fire had stripped Mercy's home of its walls. She stood beside the wagon now, her sleeves rolled, bonnet tucked under her arm. Thaddeus noticed the pale skin of her left shoulder, where the pinned sleeve met her collar. It looked like new parchment, delicate, but stronger than it seemed. He sipped the last of her coffee and stared out at the field beyond the barn, where some stubborn scrub brush still clung to life. Her voice from the night before still drifted in the back of his mind. I have land and strength and hope to offer. Now he understood that was no metaphor. Hope, in this place, was a kind of muscle something worked into shape through pain and time. They broke camp in quiet coordination. He repacked his tools and stores. She cleaned out the fire and folded the blankets. And within the hour, they were ready for the road. The wagon groaned under its wheat flour sacks, lumber straps, cloth bundles, and Mercy's pot tied carefully to a nail in the corner. She climbed up beside him with only a brief glance back at the blackened ruins. Town's about 9 miles, she said, settling her skirts. Rough trail near Elk Bend, but wagon should hold. Thaddeus nodded, clicking the reins. The horses moved forward with that steady patience only animals born of the frontier possess. The journey began in silence. Just the creak of leather and the whisper of wheels on dry earth. The terrain opened wide short grass prairie, dotted here and there with wind-warped cottonwoods. Fence posts leaned at odd angles, like forgotten markers to someone's unfinished story. A dry gully cut across the road near the halfway point, and Mercy pointed to a pile of stones near a cottonwood. That's where the Millers buried their oldest son. Fever. 3 winters ago. Thaddeus didn't answer, but he took off his hat briefly as they passed. By midday, they came into sight of Crescent Bluff, the town perched at the base of a low ridge, buildings huddled like cattle around a central well. A weathered stagecoach stop stood at the southern edge, its paint peeled, windows shuttered. Beyond that, a scatter of houses, a mercantile with a hand-painted sign, and the town's small schoolhouse, a whitewashed frame structure with a crooked bell tower that leaned just enough to suggest time was getting the better of it. Crescent Bluff was no bustling settlement. It was a place you came to disappear, or to rebuild, depending on what you believed was possible. Mercy's posture changed as they entered the main road. Her spine straightened, chin lifted just slightly. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. They stopped first at the mercantile. A wiry man with a tobacco-stained mustache looked up from a pile of grain sacks. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Thaddeus, then flicked to Mercy. "Thought your place burned out," he said bluntly. "It did," she replied just as flatly. "We're rebuilding." "This him." He nodded toward Thaddeus. "The letterman." Thaddeus didn't react. Mercy said, "His name is Mr. Quinn." The man grunted. "You'll want window glass." Then, nails, hinges, stovepipe, that sort of thing. "We'll need canvas, too," Thaddeus said, "and roof shingles." "I got 3 stacks left," the man said. "Take 'em, or they'll be gone by week's end. Storm's comin'." "We'll take them," Thaddeus replied, already calculating weight and spacing in the wagon bed. The man, Boone Tully by the name stitched into his apron, began loading without further comment. Though Thaddeus noticed the sideways glances he shot Mercy when he thought she wasn't looking. Crescent Bluff wasn't the kind of town that forgave easily or quickly forgot. And just as they turned to leave, a voice came low from behind a grain sack, flat, almost bored, but sharp enough to cut. "Don't know why she's back." Mercy heard it. She didn't flinch. She didn't slow. Thaddeus saw her jaw set just slightly harder as she stepped forward. He didn't say a word, but he filed the voice away. Same as a threat. They moved on to the hardware shop, where Mercy insisted on selecting every item herself. She ran her fingers along axe handles and tested the strength of rope coils with practiced ease. Thaddeus watched her as she worked, quietly admiring the competence with which she moved through the world. "You've done this before," he said. "Only every season," she replied, not looking up. It was late afternoon by the time they reached the edge of town. Pulling up in front of the schoolhouse, a white fence, chipped and leaning, enclosed a patch of sun-dried yard where laundry lines stretched like sleepy arms. A woman emerged from the side door as they arrived, thin, tall, and wearing a sky-blue shawl that fluttered in the breeze. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun that made her look sterner than her eyes suggested. "Miss Cora Winfield," Mercy said, "the schoolmistress." Thaddeus nodded politely. Winfield returned it. "I heard about the fire." "Clara's well?" Mercy asked, stepping down from the wagon. "She's been a pleasure," Winfield said, then added, "and very curious." Just then, the door creaked open again, and Clara Bellamy bolted out like a foal finally freed from the corral. Her dark hair streamed behind her bonnet, her boots thudding over the boards of the porch. "Mama." She flew into Mercy's embrace without hesitation, tucking herself into her mother's one-armed hold with an ease that spoke of habit, not pity. Mercy bent down, kissing the girl's forehead and murmuring something soft into her ear. Thaddeus stepped back, giving them space. When Mercy finally straightened, Clara turned to him. "Are you the man who's going to live with us?" "I am," he said gently. She studied him with open curiosity. "Do you have a dog?" "No, ma'am." "Do you like beans?" "I can stomach 'em." Clara nodded solemnly. "Miss Winfield makes 'em every Tuesday. They're awful." Cora Winfield chuckled from the steps. "She's honest, if nothing else." "We're taking her home," Mercy said. "Thank you for everything." "My pleasure," Winfield said. But her tone was measured. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Mercy, are you certain about all this?" Mercy glanced at Thaddeus, who was kneeling now as Clara showed him a carved wooden whistle. "Yes," she said, "I'm certain." The ride back was livelier. Clara perched between them on the wagon seat, firing questions like arrows. "Where are you from? What kind of freight? Did you ever see a train? Will our house have stairs? What about a window that faces the creek?" "Yes," Thaddeus answered with quiet amusement. "And a porch. Your mother likes porches." "She does," Clara agreed. "She says she can think better when her feet aren't on dirt." By the time the homestead came into view, the sun had dipped low. The shadowed bones of the old house caught the last of the golden light, and the half-standing barn glowed like a beacon broken, but not defeated. Clara's face fell a little at the sight. "It's really gone," she whispered. "For now," Mercy said. "But we're building new." They made a small campfire and shared cornbread Mercy had wrapped in cloth. Clara leaned against her mother's side and soon dozed off. Her hand curled around a carved whistle. Thaddeus pulled his coat tighter as the cold crept in. He stared into the fire, then spoke without looking up. "I didn't tell you everything," he said. Mercy's eyes didn't move from the flames. "No, you didn't." He nodded slowly. "I came west because I'd built a life I couldn't live in anymore. Too many hours, too much money. None of it meant anything." "Why now?" she asked. "Because I'm tired of building things no one remembers." She looked at him then. "You want to build something that matters?" "I do." He reached into his coat, pulled out a silver coin, and handed it to her. She turned it over. Eagle face, minted in 1869. I kept it from my first haul, back when I still thought gold was the answer. And now I think the answer might be here, he said, watching the firelight dance in her eyes. In this place. With you. And her. Mercy was silent a long moment. Then she handed the coin back. "You'll need that. Lumber prices are worse than I remembered." The fire crackled softly between them as the light faded. Mercy turned slightly, her voice low. "Do you think they'll ever forget who I was?" Before. Thaddeus looked at her, firm but gentle. "Maybe not. But I didn't come for who you were. I came for who you are right now." As they prepared the bedrolls for the night, Thaddeus stood and scanned the tree line one last time. He could feel the shift not in the air, but in himself. Something had settled. And then, just as he tied down the canvas over the last of the supplies, a man's voice cut through the dark from the ridge above. "Should have let the fire finish the job." Thaddeus froze. Mercy stood, back straight, eyes locked on the horizon. No more was said. The voice was gone as quick as it had come. But something in the air had changed. As they leave town, with supplies and Clara, a weathered man leans against a post and mutters, "Should have let the fire finish the job." The sound of hammer on timber echoed across the land like a heartbeat returning to a long, silent chest. Each strike rang clean against the backdrop of wind brushing over the prairie, and it carried farther than expected, bouncing off the bare hills like it was announcing something worth hearing. It was the kind of rhythm that said things were changing, even if the change was slow, and born of pain. The frost from the early morning had melted away by mid-morning, leaving the earth damp and pliable, just soft enough to dig and shape. Clara had found the tin bucket from her mother's salvaged belongings and was busy hauling water from the well. Proud as a sheriff, and just as serious, Mercy, seated on a tree stump that had once stood next to the garden, called out measurements while Thaddeus tested the ground for the foundation beams. A week had passed since they returned from town, and the site no longer felt like a graveyard. The charred beams had been cleared, ash swept aside into distant piles like snowdrifts, and fresh lumber now stood stacked in neat rows beside the wagon. Thaddeus had ordered the best. Each plank was checked for rot, each nail carefully counted. The old foundation had faced east, just as Mercy's late husband, Samuel, had once insisted. But Mercy had different ideas now. She squinted toward the far hills, noting the sun's position and the angle of the wind that always seemed to come roaring through the hollow, like it had a grudge. "Face it south," she said, adjusting her bonnet. "We'll still get morning light, but the walls won't groan under the winter wind like they used to." Thaddeus paused, hands resting on a plank. "You sure?" "I lived through 3 winters out here alone," she said, meeting his gaze. "I'm sure." He gave her a nod, and that was that. South it would be. Mercy wore no pretense as she worked. Though her missing arm changed what tasks she could do, it never slowed her purpose. She used her body differently, shouldering a plank into place. Balancing her weight with a finesse Thaddeus came to quietly admire. Where she couldn't lift, she directed. Where she couldn't carry, she planned. The land, it seemed, had already learned to listen to her. As the sun crept higher, the frame of the new house began to rise. First the floor joists, then the support beams, and finally, the beginnings of walls. Clara hummed as she worked, a tune half remembered from her time at Miss Winfield's school. Her boots kicked up soft trails in the dirt as she ran back and forth delivering nails and tools like it was a sacred duty. At one point, she tugged at Thaddeus's sleeve. "Can my room have a window that looks towards the town?" He smiled without turning from his work. "You can have 2, one toward town, and one toward the mountains." "Really?" she beamed. "Really. Can I write my name in the wood?" "You can carve it into the sill if you want," he said, holding out his pocket knife. "Just not too deep. Don't want the whole house leaning toward Clara." She giggled and ran off toward a beam to get started. Thaddeus let the smile settle before he turned back to his hammer. He didn't laugh much in Kansas City. He couldn't remember the last time he'd built something where laughter was part of the scaffolding. Later, while the sun sat low on the ridge and cast long shadows over the lot, Mercy came beside him with a cup of water and a strange look on her face. He took it and waited. "You said you were married once," she said, her voice quiet. "I was." He set the cup down carefully, then wiped his hands on his trousers. "She died?" Mercy asked. "Yes. Her name was Annalie. We were married barely a year. She died in childbirth. So did the baby." Mercy didn't speak, but her gaze softened. "That was 15 years back," he added. "Never remarried. Didn't see the point in building something alone again." She nodded slowly, her own silence full of knowing. They sat on a pair of planks stacked like a bench, Clara chasing butterflies nearby. "I thought about Samuel often," Mercy said after a long pause. "He had good intentions, but he wasn't practical, always planning schemes, new tools, new ways to grow wheat, even wanted to open a postal stop here once. What happened? He got distracted by big dreams. When the accident came, it wasn't just my arm I lost. It was the man who kept reaching ahead without ever securing what we already had. You think he'd mind you starting over?" She looked toward the foundation. "I think he'd be glad someone finally made something that stood." A shout from Clara interrupted them. "Someone's coming." Mercy stood at once, eyes sharp. Thaddeus followed her gaze. A lone rider approached on horseback, the dust behind him billowing slow, as he got closer. Thaddeus could see it was a ranch hand, grizzled, hat pulled low, rifle strapped across his back. The horse, a paint gelding, moved with the sure-footed gait of a trail animal. The man reined in just before the work site. "You Quinn?" he asked. "I am. Name's Holt. Work up at the Miller place. Thought you should know folks are talking." About how fast this house is going up. About the money you're spending. About who you really are. Thaddeus remained steady. "Let 'em talk. They say you're not who you claim to be. That no freight man could afford what you're doing out here." Mercy stepped forward. "He's building a home. For me. For my daughter. That's all anyone needs to know." Holt tipped his hat, less out of respect than to take her full measure. "Just be careful," he said, glancing again at Thaddeus. "This land remembers lies longer than it remembers names." And then he rode off, the hoofbeats fading into the wind. Clara stayed quiet until the sound was gone, then asked in a small voice, "Why was he mad?" "He wasn't mad," Thaddeus said. "He was afraid. Some people don't like seeing things grow where they expect ruin." Mercy's expression hardened as she watched the trail. "They'll keep watching," she murmured. "Some folks only feel tall when others are on their knees." That night, they worked late into the dusk, setting the first of the wall frames in place. Thaddeus steadied the beam while Mercy braced the side with a mallet, tapping until the angle was perfect. The stars blinked into view one by one. Clara had carved her initials CB 1873 into a support beam by the doorway. Thaddeus traced the letters once with his thumb before covering them with a coat of oil. As the fire cracked and dinner warmed in the pot, Thaddeus sat near the wagon, sharpening tools by lantern light. Mercy approached, a folded shawl in her hand. "I still have nightmares about that day," she said suddenly. "About the machine, about Samuel, about how quiet it got when he stopped screaming." He paused his sharpening. "I never told anyone that part," she added. He looked up. "You're telling me now." "I thought, after I lost the arm, no man would ever look at me like I was whole again, like I had anything left to offer." Thaddeus rose, setting the blade down carefully. "You've got more to offer than any woman I've ever met," he said. "You built this land. You raised that girl. You stood through the fire." She blinked once, and he couldn't tell if it was from the smoke or something deeper. "Then why are you here, really?" she asked. He took a long breath. "Because I saw the ruins," he said, "and thought now there's a woman worth building with." They stood there for a moment, the night wrapping around them like a coat, somewhere behind them. Clara's quiet laughter drifted up from where she played with pebbles by the fire. Then Mercy's voice changed. "Thaddeus." He turned, following her gaze. There, carved into the old stump by the creek, a new message. Fresh. They walked over slowly. The bark had been sliced away with something sharp. Letters etched deep and angry into the wood. "You built it once. Don't dare try again." Thaddeus read the words twice. Mercy stood beside him, arms folded. "We're not done yet," she said. "No," he replied. "We've only just started." The first snow came early that year, fine as sifted flour, and just as silent, blanketing the half-built home like a baptism. It fell with gentleness, quieting even the sounds of tools and boots, as if the land itself had decided to hush in reverence for what was taking shape. Snow on lumber always brought a strange beauty white, resting on raw wood. Promise pressed against effort, and this house, framed and rising with each passing day, stood now as both defiance and devotion. Mercy stood on what would soon become the porch, running her hand over the newly installed railing. The south-facing wall, her decision, caught the low winter light just right. Her fingers moved slowly, not for warmth, but in thought. The last time snow had come this early, Samuel had been alive, still drawing up grand plans on the back of flour sacks, still waking her in the middle of the night with dreams too big to hold. But this year, the porch stood part of something not dreamed, but done, behind her. The sound of Clara's voice floated from the main room, where she was carefully folding bits of cloth and placing them in a basket beneath the window. Mercy had taught her to use both hands efficiently, to fold with precision. Clara took to it as if it were art. Outside, Thaddeus moved with calm precision, clearing a path from the barn to the well, his boots crunching over the snow-packed ground. He carried a post under one arm, a small tool belt strapped around his waist, and a line of measurements etched onto the cuff of his shirt. His breath clouded before him like a signal fire, steady and unfaltering. They had been working for weeks now, each day filled with a quiet purpose that began before dawn and ended well past dark. The kitchen had its stone fireplace nearly finished. The pantry shelves stood in waiting, and Clara's room, well, she had already arranged her dolls on the sill and declared it perfect. The snow made everything feel still, but inside the home, something was blooming. Mercy stepped back through the doorway, letting the unfinished wall frame block the worst of the wind. Thaddeus glanced up as she approached. "Porch feels strong," she said. "It'll hold." He looked out toward the ridge. "Snow won't stay long. Ground's too warm yet." "Still," she murmured, "it's good to see it from up here." Thaddeus gave a small smile and nodded toward the inside. "Clara's been asking about the stove again." "She wants to bake," Mercy said, lips curling. "I told her we'd need more than flour and hope." "Well," he replied, "I got one out of two." They shared a moment of warmth, not spoken, but felt. By late morning, the snow had tapered off, inside the kitchen space. Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching what appeared to be house plans on the back of an old church bulletin Miss Winfield had given her. A ribbon held her hair out of her eyes, and a small tin lantern flickered on a nail beside her. Mercy stirred a pot near the fire, while Thaddeus knelt to install a shelf beneath the window. Every once in a while, Clara would glance over and correct him with cheerful confidence. "Mama says you measured wrong." "I did not," Thaddeus replied. Mock offense. That line bowed from the wood warping. "You're warping," Clara said, giggling. The laughter filled the unfinished room like smoke from a warm stove, curling into corners and hanging in the air. Just before midday, hoofbeats sounded down the main trail, measured. Slow, deliberate. Mercy froze. Spoon paused in her hand. Thaddeus stood, wiped his hands, and stepped outside. The figure on horseback rode tall and calm. Snow brushed the hem of a long brown coat, and a wide-brimmed hat shaded his eyes. When he dismounted, the dust of past towns seemed to fall off him in waves. "Reverend Josiah Flint," he said, offering a gloved hand. "Thaddeus Quinn." They shook hands. "I heard there was a house rising out here," the Reverend said, eyes scanning the structure. "And where there's a house, there's usually a story." Mercy appeared in the doorway. Her apron was dusted with flour, and her hair had loosened slightly under the heat. Her eyes met Flint's with calm assessment. "Reverend," she said, "I suppose you heard right." "I brought coffee," Flint said, lifting a tin from his saddlebag. "Seems to me anything worth building deserves something warm in the cup." They invited him inside, where Clara eyed the visitor with polite curiosity before offering him a tin mug. Flint drank without ceremony. "Most stories I hear out this way," he said, "end in ruin, fire, loss, bitterness. But this feels different." Mercy said nothing at first. She simply ladled out stew and handed him a bowl. "It is different," she finally said, "because we decided not to run." Flint looked from her to Thaddeus. "And the two of you." Thaddeus met Mercy's eyes. "We're building this together," he said. "Whatever comes of it." The Reverend nodded slowly. "That sounds like something worth blessing." They ate in relative quiet. Outside. Wind rattled the barn's old door. Inside. The heat from the fire made the walls sweat faintly. After the meal. Flint stood and walked the length of the main room, studying the unfinished rafters and the view through the window where the ridgeline cut the sky in two. "You plan on marrying?" he asked, turning back. Mercy opened her mouth, then paused. "I suppose we do," she said, eventually. "No time like the present," Flint replied gently. "Nothing wrong with making the blessing match the work." Thaddeus glanced at Mercy. "That's your call." She wiped her hands on her apron, uncertain, until Clara's voice broke the quiet. "Are you going to be my papa or not?" Everyone turned. Clara looked directly at Thaddeus. Her cheeks were red from firelight, and her chin trembled slightly, not from cold, but from something deeper. Thaddeus crossed to her slowly, knelt until they were eye to eye. "If it's all right with you," he said, "I'd be honored." Clara nodded. "Good. I've been wanting to for weeks." Mercy stood perfectly still. Her hand rested lightly on the back of a chair. Something passed between her and Thaddeus then. Something wordless but powerful. A binding of hope. And decision. Flint removed his hat and stepped toward the hearth. "Shall we make it official?" Mercy's voice, when it came, surprised even herself. "Today," she said, "if that's agreeable to everyone." Thaddeus answered with a smile that held more than warmth, it held a kind of reverence. Flint asked for 2 chairs, which Clara arranged like pews. He stood before them, Bible in hand, with the open land visible through the unfinished walls. The snow had returned, not heavy, but enough to soften the edges of the world. The ceremony was brief, spoken in low tones that fit the room and the people inside it, when the vows were said and the blessing given. Thaddeus took Mercy's hand, her right hand, the one that bore every callus, and kissed it gently. "I do," he said. Mercy, her eyes glistening, answered the same. When it was done, Clara clapped so loudly it made the rafters echo. The sound surprised even her, and she laughed with sudden, wild joy. The Reverend bowed his head and said a final prayer over the new home, that it may stand in peace and be warmed by more than fire. He finished. The snow thickened just as Flint mounted his horse to leave. He turned in the saddle and tipped his hat. "God keep you all." And then he rode into the white. That evening, Mercy laid a new tablecloth across the kitchen boards, a cloth she had sewn from old dress scraps, each stitch a memory, each square a story. Thaddeus carved a line into the hearthstone with his chisel Q+B. 1873. The fire glowed long into the night, casting long shadows over walls still waiting for paint, for pictures, for stories yet to be written. But already it was home. As the Reverend opens his Bible, the wind gusts against the door, but this time, no ashes come through, only sunlight and warmth. The moon rose behind a shroud of clouds, and the night felt too quiet, like the prairie was holding its breath. There were no coyotes howling from the ridgelines, no rustle of owls in the cottonwoods, Even the wind, so constant it had become background music in their lives, had fallen still inside the house. The fire in the kitchen stove hissed softly, its glow casting long, flickering shadows across the walls of freshly sanded pine. The silence pressed in on the windows like fog, making the glow of the oil lamps feel oddly fragile. Thaddeus moved through the house with a slow, practiced calm. He'd checked the latches twice already on the barn doors, the pantry window, and the front shutters that creaked when the wind was up. Tonight, they stayed still, and that unsettled him more than any storm. A week had passed since the wedding. The interior walls were nearly finished. Clara had made herself a game of organizing the cutlery, placing it into old cigar boxes marked with chalk. Mercy had begun hanging hooks for coats and stitched curtains for the window by the pantry. There was a fullness now, a rhythm that felt earned. But that quiet rhythm was disturbed today by the Miller brothers, who came riding down from the north with tight faces and tense words. 3 had gone last night. 1 had said, "Nothing but hoof prints, no broken fences." Rustlers, Thaddeus had asked. Too clean for anything else. They'd gone on to say other neighbors had seen signs. 2 cattle spooked, dogs missing, fence wires clipped in the dark. Mercy had listened without a word, one hand resting on the back of Clara's chair. When the brothers left, she said what she always did when fear tried to claw its way into her bones. "We don't run." Now, standing in the kitchen doorway with his rifle in hand, Thaddeus understood the weight of those words more than ever. Mercy appeared from the bedroom in her wool dress and thick socks, her hair tied back, eyes sharp. She carried Samuel's old rifle with a familiarity that needed no explanation. The weapon looked almost too large for her frame, but the way she held it made clear she could handle it if needed. Clara slept upstairs, wrapped in a quilt Mercy had made during the long winter after Samuel's death. Her doll rested on the windowsill beside her, framed against the glass and the slow drift of snow that had begun again around dusk. "Nothing yet," Thaddeus said, keeping his voice low. Mercy crossed to the front window and eased the shutter open just enough to peer through. Her breath fogged the glass. "How many you think would come?" she asked. "Hard to say. 4, maybe 6. Men like that don't ride alone. You ever deal with rustlers back east?" "Once. They hit our wagons outside Abilene. Took 4 horses, shot a man who tried to stop them. Never caught him." Mercy nodded. "Then you know what they'll do if we look weak. They'll take what they want, burn the rest." She pulled the curtain back farther and scanned the tree line. "There," she whispered. He joined her. Faint just at the edge of the grove, a flicker of motion, a shadow sliding between trunks, then another, and another. Too smooth, too quiet. No lanterns, no sound of spooked cattle, whoever they were. They knew what they were doing. Thaddeus moved quickly, extinguishing all lamps but one, which he placed on the windowsill opposite the barn, creating a decoy glow. Mercy crossed the room, lifted the stove hatch to dim the fire without killing it, and took her position at the west-facing window. Thaddeus took the east. The house was silent, but alive with tension. The kind that sat on your chest and made you breathe shallower, made your heartbeat echo in your ears. Then came the hoofbeats, not charging, approaching. Slow, measured. A voice called from the dark. "Evenin'," it said. "Lazy and false friendly. Don't mean no harm. Just looking for some strayed cattle." Thaddeus felt his jaw tighten. In the middle of the night he called back, leveling his rifle against the sill. "Cows don't wear watches." "Friend," came the reply, followed by a few muffled chuckles. "Just gonna take a peek in your barn." if you don't mind." "I do mind," Thaddeus said. Mercy, from the other window, added, "Move on. Nothing here belongs to you." The tone of the chuckles changed lower now, with something hungry beneath them. Another voice, rougher. "Might be we check anyway." "I wouldn't," Thaddeus said. "We're armed. We're ready. Try the barn, and you'll leave lighter than you came." Silence. Then the shuffle of movement. Boots in snow. Leather creaking. One figure moved closer, shadowed by the flickering starlight above the trees. "We heard about you," the voice called. "Mail-order husband with too much money. Widow who don't know when to quit. House too nice for a place this cursed." Mercy didn't flinch. "This land isn't cursed," she said. "It's claimed." Then the sharp, unmistakable sound of a hammer drawn back. A long beat of silence. Then came the reply. "You got fire once. Don't tempt it again." Thaddeus raised his rifle to his shoulder. "Ready." But then, the footsteps retreated. No shots, no charges, no torches thrown. Just curses, muttered low and scattered in the wind. A single set of hoofbeats led the way out. The rest followed. Within minutes, the prairie fell still again, as if the night had exhaled and gone back to sleep. Mercy didn't move for a long while. Thaddeus finally spoke. "They'll be back. I know. They didn't want a fight tonight. But they will." She turned, lowered her rifle, and sat slowly at the table, hands trembling slightly. He moved beside her, set his weapon down, and poured water into a tin cup. "You all right?" She nodded. Not used to waiting. When the threshing machine caught, it was over before I could scream. When the fire came, it burned too fast to chase. This... She paused, looking toward the window. This kind of fear. It lingers. "They didn't come through the door," he said. "You did." She looked at him, long and steady. "You stayed," she said. "I meant to." Clara's voice came faintly from upstairs. "Mama." Mercy stood, climbed the stairs quietly, and disappeared into the bedroom. Thaddeus watched the front window, eyes adjusting again to the black beyond it. He didn't move until he heard the soft creak of Mercy's footsteps returning. She wore her old shawl now, the one embroidered with faded flowers, something Samuel had given her during their first winter on the land. "They're not gone for good," she said. "No," he replied, "but neither are we." Outside, snow had begun to fall again, this time faster. The light from the kitchen window caught the flakes like dust from heaven. And on the edge of the fence post, by the gate, something caught his eye. He opened the door, stepped out carefully, rifle still in hand, and walked through the snow. There, wedged into the fence rail, was a spent cartridge casing, polished, deliberate, and pointed straight at the house. 1 year later, Clara watched the sunset from the porch her mother once sat on in ashes, her baby brother asleep in her lap. The wind had mellowed to a warm breath that whispered through the tall prairie grass, brushing over the freshly painted porch rails and the soft blue curtains fluttering in the upstairs windows. Light pooled over the land, like honey, stretching shadows across the fields where chickens now roamed freely, and the barn stood tall, roof repaired and weathered to a clean silver gray. The house, Mercy's house. Now the Morrison house rose strong and square from the earth, its southern face drinking in the last of the sun. Wood smoke curled from the chimney, drifting upward into a sky already beginning to shift into indigo and gold. The land, once so quiet and smudged by loss, now hummed with life. Quiet footsteps, baby coos. the distant sound of a horse's bridle jingling near the fence line. Inside, Thaddeus leaned over the kitchen table, sanding down the edge of a new cupboard door. His hands, marked by months of labor, moved slow and certain, nearby. Mercy folded linens into a cedar chest, pausing now and then to listen for the child's breathing. Her gait had changed, no longer tight with grief or braced against wind. Now, it was balanced, quietly confident. She moved through her home like a woman who had built each inch of it, and she had. Samuel, their son, was just past 6 weeks old. He slept more than Clara ever had. But when he cried, it was with a voice that shook walls. He was swaddled in a quilt stitched by Mercy's hand, resting in a cradle Thaddeus had carved from leftover pine boards and an old church pew they'd salvaged from the edge of the county. Clara had taken to being a sister with the same fierce dedication she once brought to carrying nails and counting boards. She fed the chickens, ran letters to the neighbors, and wrote in a journal each night, a habit Miss Winfield had encouraged. On this night, she sat on the porch's wide swing. Samuel nestled in her lap as the sky turned orange, then dusky plum. Her feet pushed the swing gently as she hummed a lullaby her mother used to sing when the nights were harder and the roof was only a plan. Inside, Mercy lit the evening lamp. The flame caught the glass just right, throwing a circle of gold on the wooden floor. "Feels like it's always been this way," she murmured. Thaddeus looked up. "You mean loud and full of crumbs?" She smiled, then walked over and set down the folded linens. "No," she said. "I mean, full, like something finished and just beginning, all at once." He took her hand, the one with the worn palm and faint flower dust still lingering on her fingertips. "We did it," he said. "We did," she echoed, then added, quieter. "I never thought I'd be happy again." Thaddeus brushed his thumb along her wrist. "I did," he said. "First time I saw you sitting on that charred log." She laughed softly and leaned her forehead against his shoulder. Later, with the table cleared and Samuel asleep upstairs, Clara tiptoed into the kitchen and set a small leather-bound book on the counter. Mercy picked it up. The edges were worn, the cover soft from handling. Clara had tied a blue ribbon around it, the same color as her mother's old shawl. "What's this?" Mercy asked. "It's for the New Town book," Clara said, her voice proud. "Miss Winfield's been collecting stories." Thaddeus raised a brow. "Town book." "She said Crescent Bluff is finally big enough to start remembering itself," Clara explained. "So we're all writing down things. Stories, families, who we are." Mercy opened the book and scanned the first few pages, births, marriages, a few poems. Then she turned to a blank page and picked up the charcoal pencil Thaddeus had left on the counter. "What do I write?" Clara looked up at her with those same wide green eyes that once begged for a room with 2 windows. "You write how we began." Mercy stared at the blank paper for a long time. Then she began. "1 year ago today, a man arrived on a freight wagon and found a house burned to the ground. He stayed anyway. Together, we built something stronger than wood." Thaddeus watched her, his eyes soft, his hand resting over hers for a moment before stepping outside to check the barn gate. The air had cooled by now, the kind of crisp you feel in your teeth. He ran a hand along the fence rail, noting where a fresh coat of paint was needed. Overhead, the first stars pricked through the dark. Behind him, the sound of Clara's voice rose again. "Papa, tell me again how you and Mama met." Thaddeus walked slowly back toward the porch, boots brushing over gravel. He leaned against the post, folded his arms, and said, "Well, I came west looking for a wife and a new life, And I found your mama sitting in the ruins of her old house. Clara's eyes lit up. And you stayed. I did. Because I thought now there's a woman worth building a life with. Even though everything was burned up. Especially because everything was burned up. Mercy joined them, easing onto the swing beside her daughter and wrapping an arm around them both. The wind lifted gently, brushing Mercy's shawl and setting the porch swing rocking just slightly. The baby stirred, then settled again. Inside. The oil lamp flickered. A knock came at the door just before supper the next evening, when Thaddeus opened it. He found Miss Winfield standing there, hat in hand, cheeks pink from the cold. She held a small wrapped parcel. "I brought something," she said, stepping inside, "for the baby." Mercy took the package, unwrapped it carefully, and revealed a small wooden rattle carved in the shape of a bear. "Clara mentioned Samuel likes to grip things," Winfield said. "Thank you," Mercy replied. "You've been more generous than we deserve." Winfield smiled. "You gave this town something to believe in again." They offered her stew, and she stayed for supper, sharing updates from town, 2 more families arriving by spring, talk of a new general store, and a traveling photographer who might set up shop. As the meal wound down, Winfield looked at Mercy. "You've done more than build a home," she said. "You reminded people what home can mean." Mercy folded her hands over her lap. "We just kept going. That's all." But it wasn't all, and they both knew it. Later that night, after Clara had gone to bed and the baby slept in his cradle, Thaddeus and Mercy sat out on the porch. The fireflies had come early this year, blinking lazily in the tall grass beyond the fence. Mercy held a cup of coffee. The wind still moves the grass the same way it did the morning after the fire, soft and slow, like fingers parting through hair, whispering secrets the prairies kept longer than memory, and if you sit quiet long enough, you can still hear the faint creak of a porch swing, or the distant clink of a tin cup against a nail-driven rail, the kind of sound that meant a man was home, or trying to be. And maybe that's all we're ever doing out here, trying to be home in a world too wide to hold, and yet still worth crossing, even when everything that once stood has burned down to ash. Because some folks, the good ones, they know it ain't the fire that defines you, but what you do after the embers settle and the wind starts up again, carrying with it the scent of old leather, turned earth, cornbread in the oven, and the sweet smoke of juniper logs cut last fall and seasoned just right for a long night's heat. And you might find yourself thinking of a woman named Mercy, sitting tall in the ruins with only one arm and no intention of being pitied, and of a man named Thaddeus, carrying a fortune he never mentioned, because the only wealth he cared about couldn't be counted, only built, nail by nail, wall by wall, breath by breath, beside someone who didn't need saving, but needed someone to stand still when the world turned cruel. And maybe you'll remember Clara, too, the little girl with sharp eyes and soft hands, asking questions no grown man dared to. Like, do you love my mama? And will you help us build a house with windows that face both ways, toward the town and toward the mountains, so she could see where trouble was coming and where the light first touched? And if you do remember her, then you know why stories like this matter, because it ain't just about cattle or rustlers or old rifles with hair triggers. It's about the quiet courage it takes to stay, when running would be easier. The kind of courage that doesn't show up in newspaper clippings or preacher sermons, but in patched sleeves and worn boots, and the smell of old ink on letters folded and unfolded so many times they feel like skin. And somewhere in your mind, You might hear horse hooves on frost-bitten ground, or the rustle of wildflowers growing where a burned home once stood. Roots pressing down deep because ashes make fine soil for second chances. And you might start to feel that old ache, regret, maybe, or remembrance, or just the longing for a world where people kept their word, even when it broke them, where a promise made on a porch meant something, and a child asking to call you Papa could be the purest kind of redemption a soul could ever hope for. And if you're lucky, you'll remember the silence of the town the night the rustlers came, and the even deeper silence after they left, not because they were beaten by bullets, but by will, by the fire in a widow's voice that said, "We don't run," and the steel in a man's shoulders that said, "We don't burn," twice. And you'll carry that with you like an old medal in your pocket, something no one sees but you feel when your fingers brush it in the dark. A reminder that justice doesn't always shout it, sometimes just waits, quietly, behind a barn door, or inside the eyes of a woman who refused to give up. And maybe you'll find yourself sitting by your own lamp one night, staring at nothing in particular, just letting the quiet settle, and remembering how sometimes the best things grow from ruins, not in spite of them. And maybe you'll tell someone younger than you a story, not this story, not exactly, but one like it, about good men and better women, and the long trail between being broken and being whole. And when they ask you if it's true, you'll say truth's not about belief, son, it's about remembering, because truth doesn't vanish when people stop looking for it. It just waits for someone to sit beside it and say, "I still see you." And if all that lingers is a feeling regret, peace, the soft ache of love found too late, or justice arriving on tired feet, then that's enough, because feelings make us human, and humanity is the last fence post standing when the land goes quiet. So if this story moved something in you, even just a little, leave a sign, some proof that you still believe in honor, in quiet love, in houses that rise after fire. Type 1 if you're still out there, still listening, still hoping, and join us again next time on Western Story Chronicles, where stories are kept warm like old quilts, and the truth never rides alone.